The house was too quiet for a Friday night. Not cozily quiet, alert. The kind where you can hear the kitchen light switch click and the water in the sink drip a little longer than it should. Ethan Mason stood at the sink, mechanically drying a plate he had already dried a minute ago. He wasn't looking at his reflection in the window, but he could feel it. Someone was standing behind him. Not close. Not touching. Just present. "Ethan," she said. He recognized that tone instantly. Not a question. Not a request. A warning. He slowly placed the towel on the counter and turned around. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway, barefoot, in the soft sweater he had given her last Christmas. Too calm. Too composed. And with that expression on her face that only appeared in rare moments, when the words had long been ready, and the outcome of the conversation, in her opinion, was already predetermined. "Are you tired?" she asked, though the question was clearly just a formality. "A little," he replied. "Why?" She took a step forward, then stopped, as if she'd changed her mind, folded her arms across her chest, then lowered them, raised them again. Ethan noted this automatically. He always noticed such things. A habit formed by years of living together. Emily didn't fidget without reason. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began. "Here it comes. About us," she added hastily, as if afraid he would interrupt. "About where we're going. About what happens to couples, after several years together." She spoke calmly, almost confidently. The words flowed smoothly, without hesitation, like a memorized text. "I read an article," she continued. "Then another. Listen to podcasts. They talk a lot about personal growth, about honesty, about how important it is not to lose yourself in marriage." Ethan was silent. He just looked at her, noting the details that didn't fit this confidence. Too quick a breath, fingers gripping the edge of her sleeve, a gaze that slipped away every time he tried to meet her eyes. "Some couples," Emily said, "find a way to refresh their relationship. Give each other space. Temporarily." She emphasized the word temporarily. A little too much. Ethan felt something inside him shift slowly. Not pain. Not anger. Rather, a feeling that the floor beneath his feet was no longer level. "Space?" he repeated. "Freedom," she corrected gently. "Honest. Without secrets. Without lies." She smiled. Quickly. Almost reflexively. "I'm not talking about breaking up," she added immediately. "Not at all. On the contrary. I think it could make us stronger." Stronger. An interesting choice of word. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Ethan asked. He was surprised himself at how calm he sounded. Emily exhaled, as if she had been waiting for this question. 3 months, she said. Just 3. No restrictions. We'll be honest with each other. No questions. No scenes. Just an experience. And then we'll come back to each other. With understanding. With gratitude. She spoke faster and faster, as if afraid that a pause would break the magic of what she was saying. Many people do it, she added, and it works for them. It's not cheating if everything is open. It's a choice. Ethan looked at her and suddenly realized clearly. She wasn't testing his reaction. She was waiting for approval. He saw how tense her shoulders were, how her chin trembled slightly, how the cup in her hand clinked against the saucer, though she tried to hold it steady. You've already decided everything, he said quietly. Emily froze. For a fraction of a second, just one, the mask of confidence cracked. I decided we needed to talk, she answered after a pause. Honestly, like adults. Honestly, another word that sounded strange. Ethan nodded. Slowly. He didn't feel like arguing. Didn't feel like asking questions. Not yet. I need to think, he said. Emily blinked. Disappointment flashed across her face, too obviously to be missed. Of course, she said hastily. Of course. It's important. I understand. But he saw, she had expected a different answer. Later, already lying in bed next to her, Ethan stared at the ceiling and listened to her even breathing. Sleep came to her quickly, not to him. Emily's words played over and over in his mind, but it wasn't about them. It was about the feeling that wouldn't let go. This proposal wasn't a beginning. It was a cover. Ethan didn't know yet, for what exactly, but he knew one thing. The crack had already appeared, and if it wasn't noticed in time, it would break everything. Ethan didn't realize something had changed right away. Not that evening. Not even the next morning. It came later, as a feeling that couldn't be tied to a specific moment. As if the air in the house had shifted slightly. The same smell of coffee. The same footsteps in the hallway. The same woman beside him. But something in this combination no longer added up to the familiar picture. Emily was lighter, too light. She hummed as she got ready for work, smiled more often than usual. Her movements became quick, almost hurried, as if an invisible timer was ticking inside her. Ethan noticed this at the edge of his consciousness, not attaching importance, but now every gesture seemed highlighted. He remembered how it all began. About 2 months ago, Emily suddenly started talking about health, about wanting to feel better. She signed up for a gym, not near home, but in another neighborhood. Bought a new gym bag. Then clothes. Not practical, not every day. Strangely chosen for someone who claimed to be going just to run on the treadmill. At the time, it seemed normal, even commendable. But now the memories lined up in a chain. She started staying late. First 15 minutes, then 30. She explained it with traffic, workouts, got talking with the girls. Ethan nodded. He always nodded, because he saw no reason not to believe. He was one of those men who consider trust not a weakness, but a choice. Emily kept her phone face down more and more often. She hadn't done that before. When messages came, she would glance quickly and smile. Not widely, not openly. A smile directed inward. The kind of smile people give when they receive confirmation of something important. Ethan caught himself watching this too closely. Like a detective who hasn't yet realized he's started an investigation. Who's writing? He would ask sometimes. From work? She would answer easily. Or from the group. Which group? He never clarified. Now it seemed strange. On those nights when Emily fell asleep first, Ethan lay beside her and replayed the last conversations. Compared intonations. Remembered pauses. Moments where the answers were too quick, or, on the contrary, too deliberate. Intuition didn't scream. It whispered. Ethan tried to convince himself that it was all just a reaction to her proposal. That he had simply become paranoid. That it's easy to find meaning where there is none, if you start looking. But then there were little things. Emily changed her phone password. She didn't say anything. He noticed himself when the screen didn't unlock automatically as before. She started going into another room to answer calls more often. Spoke quietly. Laughed softly. One evening, Ethan walked into the bedroom and saw her hastily closing her laptop. Too abruptly. Too clumsily. Everything okay? He asked then. Yeah, she replied. Just tired. The word tired sounded unconvincing. The worst wasn't that. The worst was her look. She looked at Ethan differently. Not coldly. Not with contempt. With something like condescension. The way you look at someone who doesn't know what you already know. One morning at breakfast, she started talking about space again. About how people fear change. About how fear is a prison. She spoke beautifully. Intelligently. Almost inspiringly. Ethan listened and suddenly caught himself thinking, these words weren't born here. They were brought from outside. He began to pay attention to the phrasing, to the repeated turns of phrase, to sentences that sounded like quotes, like fragments of someone else's texts. Emotional honesty, conscious choice, a new form of intimacy. Emily had never talked like that before. One evening, when she went to shower, Ethan stayed alone in the kitchen. The silence became thick again, almost tangible. He looked at the table, at her phone left face down, and felt something slowly forming inside him. Not sudden, not impulsive, calm. If he was wrong, he would find out. If not, the truth would still come out. Intuition rarely makes mistakes when it speaks so insistently. Ethan didn't feel anger. Not yet. He felt alertness, and a cold understanding that his life might have been following a script written by someone else for a long time. He stood up, poured himself some water, and looked at his reflection in the window. The man looking back at him was calm, restrained, and dangerous in his silence. The game had only just begun. Emily came home late. Ethan heard the key turn in the lock before the door handle clicked. He was sitting in the living room, by the light of a desk lamp, with a glass of wine in his hand, not because he wanted to drink, but because he wanted to look relaxed. He had rehearsed this expression all evening. Calm. Openness. No sharp edges. You're not asleep? Emily was surprised, taking off her coat. I was waiting for you, he replied softly. She froze for a second. Just a fraction of a second, but Ethan noticed. People who hide the truth always give themselves away in the little things. A pause, an extra breath, a glance away. Is everything okay? She asked, walking into the room. Yes, he took a sip of wine. I've been thinking about our conversation. This was said casually, almost carelessly. But the effect was immediate. Emily sat down opposite him. Not beside, opposite. As if at negotiations. And she asked cautiously. Ethan paused. He let the silence hang between them, so she would fill it with her own fears. It was the same technique she had tried to use on him. At first, it was hard for me, he began. Not because of jealousy. More, because of the unexpectedness. Such things aren't discussed in passing. She nodded too quickly. I understand, Emily said. That's why I tried to explain everything carefully. Ethan smiled faintly. Yes, and you were convincing. He saw relief flash in her eyes. But you know, he continued, the more I thought about it, the more I realized. Maybe you're right. Emily leaned forward. Really? We really are stuck in a rut, Ethan said. And if you feel like you need space, I don't want to be the one holding you back. This phrase was taken almost verbatim from the article he had read that morning. It hit the mark. Emily smiled, widely, sincerely, in a way she hadn't smiled at him in a long time. She came over, hugged him, pressing her cheek to his shoulder. I was so afraid you wouldn't understand, she whispered. I knew you were smart, that you could see the bigger picture. Ethan hugged her back. His hands were warm. His expression, flawless. His thoughts, cold. I'm not saying it's easy for me, he added as she pulled away. But if this is really temporary, if we're honest with each other, maybe it will do us good. Of course it's temporary, Emily said quickly. Just a few months. A pure experience. No destruction. Ethan nodded. Then I have one condition. She tensed. What? Total transparency, he said calmly. No lies. No omissions. If we're doing this, we're doing it honestly. Emily smiled, but a shadow flickered in her smile. Of course, she replied. That's exactly what I meant. They agreed quickly. Almost too quickly. Terms. Boundaries. Formal words behind which lay very different meanings. Emily spoke with enthusiasm, Ethan, with cautious deliberation. The roles were perfectly distributed. Later, lying in bed, Ethan felt Emily snuggle up to him. She was unusually affectionate, as if celebrating a victory. Her breathing became even long before he closed his eyes. Ethan didn't sleep. He stared into the darkness and replayed the events. Every gesture, every look, every moment where she thought she had won. The next day, everything changed. Emily seemed to have shed an invisible burden. She became lighter, more talkative, smiled more often, but not at him, at her phone screen. Messages came constantly. She didn't hide it. Now she didn't need to. I'll be late tonight, she said one evening. Dinner with colleagues. Of course, Ethan replied. Take your time. He began to observe. Not intrusively, not demonstratively, just attentively. He noticed how her gait changed when she was running errands. How she chose her clothes, more carefully than before. How she checked her reflection in the mirror before leaving. And how, after returning, she became distant, as if part of her remained somewhere else. Lucas's messages grew bolder. Ethan checked the mail cautiously, not every day. He knew. Excessive greed for information leads to mistakes. But what he saw was enough. Lucas wrote with blatant, self-satisfied confidence. He laughed at how easily everything had gone, at how the husband turned out to be understanding. In one message, he wrote, "Tell your philosopher thanks. Now we have free reign." Ethan closed the laptop. He didn't feel rage. He felt clarity. Now he had what they didn't: time, patience, and a full view of the field. The agreement he had given was not a concession. It was an invitation, and they had accepted it without question. Ethan poured himself some coffee, looked at the clock, and for the first time in a long time thought that everything was going exactly as it should. While they built the illusion of freedom, he built the finale. Ethan understood one simple thing. One truth is not enough if it remains in the shadows. Victory in such stories is rarely achieved by direct confrontation. It is built on symmetry, when each participant is forced to see themselves from the outside and realize the scale of their own decisions. Lucas had a weakness. Ethan noticed it almost immediately. Arrogance. People who are confident in their impunity always leave traces. They consider themselves smarter than others, and therefore don't see the need to be careful. Lucas was exactly like that. In his correspondence, he allowed himself more than he should. Bragged. Judged. Shared details that should never have been put in writing. Ethan chose his moment. He didn't act abruptly. Didn't reach out directly. That would have been a mistake, premature and noticeable. Instead, he did what he did best, put the whole picture together. Social media turned out to be surprisingly generous. A few hours of careful analysis, and the mosaic came together. Lucas Harper, 38 years old, married, wife, Megan Harper, a nurse at a private clinic in the south of the city. Ethan looked at her profile for a long time. The photos were ordinary, a smile, a work uniform, rare family snapshots. In one of them, Lucas stood next to her, his hand on her shoulder. The same confident smile, the same habit of taking up space. Ethan didn't feel anger, responsibility. He knew what he was about to do and understood the cost. But he also understood, to remain a passive observer was to allow the story to repeat itself again and again, with new names and the same consequences. The first message he wrote was anonymous. Short, calm, without accusations. You don't know me, but I believe you have the right to know the truth. If you want, I can confirm it. The reply came a few hours later. Who are you? What are you talking about? Ethan didn't rush. He gave her time, just enough for anxiety to take root in her mind and begin to work on its own. The next message contained just 2 screenshots. No comments. No signature. The reply was almost instant. Is this a joke? Ethan wrote, no. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. After that, he offered a secure communication channel, a new email address, created specifically for this purpose. If Megan decided to go further, she would write. If not, he wouldn't insist. She wrote after 20 minutes. The messages were abrupt, bewildered, then long, full of pain and anger. She asked questions, which Ethan answered precisely and without emotion. He provided facts, dates, context. He didn't persuade. He showed. When she saw everything, the correspondence, the plans, the contemptuous comments, her tone changed. Doubts disappeared. Determination appeared. He's done this before, she wrote. I felt it, but I had no proof. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. Now the picture was complete. If you're ready, he replied, we can act together. Calmly, legally, without hysterics. Megan agreed. In parallel, Ethan made another move. He contacted the HR department of the company where Emily and Lucas worked. Not in his own name. Formally, coldly, with attachments that couldn't be ignored. Correspondence during work hours. Use of corporate resources. Violation of the internal code. The reply came the next day. An internal investigation has begun. Emily suspected nothing. She lived in a state of mild euphoria, confident that everything was going according to her script. She talked about the future, planned weekends, sometimes even thanked Ethan for his understanding. He listened, remembered, and remained silent. One evening, she said, you've become different, calmer. Ethan smiled. Maybe I've just learned to let go. She accepted this answer without question. People rarely ask questions when it's convenient not to know the answer. By the end of the week, everything was ready. Megan confirmed she was ready for a personal meeting. Ethan's lawyer prepared the documents. The company set dates for interviews. Ethan looked at the calendar. Friday, he invited Emily to dinner. Said he wanted to celebrate the new stage. She agreed with joy, choosing a dress she clearly hadn't bought for him. Ethan watched her and thought about how easily people confuse freedom with impunity. They thought they had permission. In reality, they had been given time. And time, in skilled hands, is the most dangerous tool. The restaurant was chosen deliberately. Not too noisy, but not secluded. A place where people feel safe, confident that personal dramas dissolve in the general hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Ethan knew it was here that the truth would sound loudest. Emily entered first. She looked flawless. The dress accentuated her figure. The makeup was perfect down to the smallest detail. There was an elevated mood in her movements, almost triumph. She walked as if the evening belonged to her. Ethan stood up to meet her, smiled, pulled out her chair. You look especially beautiful today, he said. So do you, she replied with a light laugh. It's nice that you finally decided to celebrate. He nodded. Yes, a celebration was appropriate. They ordered wine. For a few minutes, they talked about nothing. Food, music, how quickly time flies. Emily was relaxed, almost happy. She didn't feel threatened, didn't sense a trap. It was at this moment that Ethan looked toward the entrance and nodded almost imperceptibly. Emily followed his gaze. At first, she just didn't understand. Then, she tensed. And a second later, her face paled. Megan was approaching the table. Calm, collected. With a woman Emily didn't know, but immediately understood an attorney. Such things are read instantly. Emily, Ethan said softly. You know Megan, don't you? Lucas's wife. Time seemed to stumble. Emily opened her mouth, but couldn't find words. Her gaze darted between faces, trying to catch on to something familiar, stable. What's going on? She whispered. Megan stopped next to the table. There was no hysteria in her eyes. Only weariness and cold clarity. I'd like to understand that too, she said. But, fortunately, I now have answers. Ethan carefully placed a folder on the table. Everything is here, he said in an even voice. Correspondence, dates, plans, and proof that your idea was not spontaneous. Emily reached for the folder but stopped, as if burned. Ethan, listen, she began. He raised his hand. No, now you listen. He spoke quietly, without pressure, and that was why every word hit its mark. You asked for freedom, Emily, but you didn't want freedom, you wanted permission. Permission to continue what you had already started behind my back. You rehearsed this speech. You received instructions. You considered me convenient. Megan added. And you, she looked directly at Emily. He considered temporary. Another one. He's had more stories like this than you think. Emily looked at her with wide eyes. That's not true. Megan silently opened her phone and placed it on the table. A few messages. A few phrases. Enough. Emily leaned back in her chair. All her confidence crumbled in seconds. The company is also aware, Ethan continued. The investigation has already begun. Use of work resources. Violation of the code. I think an official conversation awaits you in the coming days. He placed another envelope next to it. And these are documents. My lawyer prepared everything in advance. Emily looked at the envelope as if it were something unreal. You planned all this? She whispered. Ethan looked at her intently. Without anger. Without triumph. No, Emily. You planned all this. I just brought the process to its conclusion. She tried to say something, but her voice broke. The words no longer obeyed. Megan straightened up. Lucas will be held accountable. And not just in the family. I'm not going to turn a blind eye anymore. She turned and left without looking back. Ethan stood up next. He had paid the bill in advance, another detail Emily hadn't noticed. I'm sorry you made that choice, he said finally. But now you'll have to live with its consequences. He left. Emily remained sitting at the table, amid strangers' conversations and the clatter of dishes, feeling the world she thought she controlled collapse completely. Everything happened quickly after that. The company investigation ended in dismissal. The divorce, without disputes or delays. The facts spoke louder than any excuses. Emily tried to explain, rewrite history, but the truth was recorded by letters, dates, words. No one listened to her anymore. Ethan, for the first time in a long time, felt silence inside. The apartment was calm, honest, without double meanings and hidden phone screens. He wasn't in a hurry to start a new life, he just lived. Sometimes he thought about that evening, about how easily people mistake kindness for weakness, and how dangerous it is to underestimate those who know how to be silent and observe. The freedom Emily so wanted to gain did come, just not to her. Ethan closed the door on the past without looking back. The story was over. Fairly. And finally,